All right, why is it the standout track for you, Jason?
It's just hard because I could have gone in many different directions with a standout track, but I chose Devil Inside because to me it sort of is the center of the Venn diagram of what INXS brings to this album in terms of musicality and their musical chops, their writing between Andrew Ferris and Michael Hutchins, his vocals. And it kind of lives right in that. It blends that sort of pub rock, that sort of dance pop, funk, blues. It's all sort of, you can find all of that. And I think that, what they're so good at is sort of blending and a lot of those different styles. And for me, this track in particular sort of hits right at the center of all of those.
It is danceable guitar rock, which is a particular flavor of rock, right? Like not all guitar music is dance music, but this really has there's some real propulsion, I think, to these songs, and particularly Devil Inside with the snare, like that. Ooh, there's some darkness there. There's a little bit of danger, but not too much danger. There's this. You're talking about sweet spots. I see this sweet spot right here. It is very sweet.
I actually think this might be really controversial. I don't know how you're going to feel about what I'm about to say, Tyler.
I'm so ready.
I'm not sure how you're going to feel either, Jason. But I wonder if the closest modern connection to INXS would be early Maroon 5.
I saw recently. I was again reading a little bit about and preparing for this. I saw where Maroon 5 is listed as sort of being influenced by INXS.
Yeah,
it's INXS being influenced. So I think you're absolutely right.
I love that.
And even the band before they were called Maroon 5, they were called Kara's Flowers. Even when they were a little bit more rock. I mean, I don't know where Maroon 5 stands right now. It's kind of, frankly, whatever will make the money, I think, is what they're making now. But
it's an amorphous blob of musical content. That's kind of how it feels.
Well, and I think with INXS, you see what this was by far their their largest album, most commercial successful album. But seeing what they did after this, I think they kind of feel like they got kind of pushed into a bit more pop.
Yeah.
And very much like Maroon 5, I think. If you listen, especially if you listen to some of the albums, in the songs that didn't chart, they're really trying to still hold on to that rock and bluesy funk stuff a little bit. Mm-hmm. That I think they just really do so well in Kick.
Pop rock being a thing
with a hyphen, not a slash.
Yeah, pop rock.
Yeah,
pop rock being a thing unto itself. Let's say Michael Hutchins survives.
Yeah.
Right. I think we're getting into a timeline question there as well. It was their 6th album as well. So a lot of bands never make it that far. And so I wonder how much steam they would have had otherwise if he would have survived. And also in the same way that Maroon 5 was about to hit right before or right after Michael Hutchins died, it kind of there was an interesting divergence, I think, in rock at that time, where you had this New York scene in the early aughts with the Strokes, and then you had the sort of White Stripes doing rootsy Detroit kind of bluesy sort of stuff, because you already felt them going in that sort of classic rock direction as well. I wonder if they would have really gone down that sort of Black Keys, White Stripes route, and then sort of passed the baton there.
Yeah, for me, musically also at this time period when I was really into INXS and, when I was in my teen years, 16 driving, this is, album that I would be playing in the car all the time. It was also right along U2. And, yes. And I think of I don't combine the two of them, but I do wonder if Michael Hutchins had survived, if he hadn't had his accident that he had that changed him a little bit, even before he took his own life. I wonder if they would have a similar, not same sound, but similar kind of career track as a U2 has.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well,
that is really interesting.
The album after this one, I like the album. I like X that followed this as well, and I think in some ways it was a more critical success than Kick, but this album had the bangers, and so that's what. But after X. I was listening to some of the tracks on the way here today to record this, and I think their last hit before Hutchins died was that "Elegantly Wasted" song, which is just not. I don't know what they were going what route they were taking at that point.
Yeah, I do like X, and I actually I think my second favorite album of theirs is "Welcome to Wherever You Are." And I do wonder, again, there's a lot of talk about even before Michael Hutchins died. He had his brain damage accident.
Yeah.
And a lot of talk about him just being a changed person. And I do wonder if we're seeing some of that in the music they're producing, falling off a little bit. So I just wonder if he hadn't had the accident, if he had survived, if he had lived.
And if grunge hadn't exploded the way it did in the 90s.
Yeah. Because grunge was working against him too. But but this is more, because Britpop was happening at the same time though. So, and this is more akin to that than to anything that was happening in the Pacific Northwest. I do feel like there's I think I've quoted this before, something from one of the Gallaghers from Oasis talking about how Radiohead isn't party music. And I'm certain that they would think that INXS is party music, right? Like this is I think exactly what whichever Gallagher that was talking about, right?
Gallaghers aren't my barometer. They say, although, and I've said this before, what's Noel Gallagher's band, the High Flying Circus or something like that?
Yeah, the High Flying Noel Gallagher band.
Yeah, something. I don't know. Yeah. You can tell how much I love it. I don't even know what the name of the band is, but they've had some good songs. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they're all right.
Those dudes.
Party music. What is it? In my surprise at you choosing INXS, I thought you were going to choose U2.
And I may have, except that this is again, the detriment to coming in on season 7 is that I know you've already covered a little bit of U2.
Not an album,
though. Yeah, but I could have chosen U2, and I think I would have chosen maybe a surprising U2 album.
Which one?
I would have gone with Achtung Baby.
That wouldn't surprise me.
I think a lot of people would say the Joshua Tree, right?
That wasn't the one that was nominated.
We had someone on the pod suggest that only the first 4 or 5 tracks of Joshua Tree are perfect, and then after that it falls apart.
I think Achtung Baby is another one where I didn't skip a lot of songs or never skipped a song listening to it. And it's right around the same, similar
Mysterious Ways on that one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's kind of an INXS-y U2 album, to be honest.
Yeah, they were literally these were my 2 top bands at this time in my life, right? They were right there. But so I think also I was, at this time I was listening to a lot of REM and Erasure and there's some things other albums I could have gone with, I think. I also contemplated briefly, again, back to being all over the map a little bit musically. I contemplated at one point Jagged Little Pill.
Yes.
Which we still haven't covered yet. Crazy no one brought that one up
My dad and my stepmom just saw her the other night in St. Louis and said she ripped. She's so good still.
She's a good performer.
Yeah.
That's another I think an album that's non-skippable.
Yeah,
I can't disagree.
But I felt like that I had a lot more sort of personal attachment and nostalgia to Kick, so that's what I.
Yeah.
Dear listeners, if you want to talk about Jagged Little Pill,
we're ready.
Email us. We're ready.
The quick anecdote that was my corroborating evidence for you perhaps choosing U2 was the time, because Jason's not lying when he says that he plays music all the time, because when I first let me fill out a little bit of our biography here. I worked with Jason for 4 years as one of the student employees in the admissions office at the theater school, and for the first 2 years of that we were in our old building. Yes. And we were all crammed into this little office together. So sometimes as many as 6 student workers, plus Melissa and Jason, who were, the heads of the admissions office. So Jason would have the soundtrack going, the Pandora going all day, every day while we're working in there. And I remember I went home sick on a Friday one time, and I go back to my apartment and I take a nap. And then I wake up from the nap, and my coworker, Lauren, our friend Lauren Mitchell from TTS, she texts me and she goes, "Tyler, why did you leave? As soon as you left, Jason started a YouTube Power Hour, and I got to get out of here." And I was like, "Oh, shit, I'm sorry." And she goes, "You would have done it even if you were here."
Yeah, no, the equivalent now is that I get into the car and I listen a lot to the Sirius XM 80s channel.
Yeah.
And Mitsu, my wife, is just seriously, 80s? Can we get off the 80s channel?
Listen, there's going to be a lot of quality packed onto that station. She shouldn't knock that.
For a long time though, if you remember this in that office, I was not a dictator when it came to the music selections and the because I did for a long time I used to have a Rhapsody account at that time. This is when putting us in place. Right?
Oh gosh,
but there used to have a channel on Rhapsody, is make your own radio channel for each of the student workers. So for a long time, I know there was a Tyler channel.
Yeah, there was a Tyler channel. I wonder what was on there. What was on there?
I don't have that anymore, so I can't check. But I imagine, I feel like I want to say there was, I don't know, maybe some Radiohead, maybe
probably some Radiohead.
Were you into Foo Fighters back then too?
I think you and I have probably shared some Foo Fighters over the years.
Foo Fighters, I think,
some of that. And then you and I, it should also be mentioned the great trips that we had to Nebraska.
Yes.
For several summers and long van rides between Chicago and Lincoln, Nebraska for admissions events. And there was some great music on those trips as well.
I still maintain I was able to pull over when I shifted off Rhapsody. I still have, I think, a playlist called Lincoln or Bust.
Lincoln or Bust, baby. That's what it's all about. Yes. So you're a great connoisseur of the customized radio station or the playlist, and we love that about you. So okay, let's talk a little bit more brass tacks for this case that you're making. We asked you to nominate a perfect album.
Yes.
Right. Something that you believe is quote unquote perfect. We didn't articulate for you what that is, but tell us a little bit about what standards you were using. You've already mentioned some of them, no skips, those kind of things. What else haven't you mentioned about those standards?
I think for me, what I think about this as a challenge or as an assignment, I think I wanted to think about what is an album that I continually come back to. It's perfect because it doesn't just exist in its time and place. It doesn't feel dated, and at least to me, that, it's one that I feel like I can come back to over and over again. And that not only does it there's a nostalgia attached to it because of that, but also I feel like I always still learn something new about it each time I listen to it.
Yeah.
And it still speaks, it still has a voice and speaks to me in a new way. I also just think that if you think about INXS in particular as a band, I feel like that this album is perfect in that I think it really gives you a full overview of their style, their abilities as musicians. I just also think that Michael Hutchence is just I think an electric performer and vocalist. And I think that, but yet there's a lot of range shown on this album.
Yeah.
So I feel like that it's perfect for many reasons. And I think that's what I was thinking of whenever I was trying to decide. This was my immediate thought. When it was Kick, but I wanted to justify it for myself, make sure there wasn't a better choice.
Good, yeah,
and I feel like that, and I feel like that this album just it's of its time. It's certainly I think you said, Tyler, it just sounds like 80s for you.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that there is this word gets thrown out a lot, but I feel like there's a bit of a timeless quality to it too. Some of these tracks you can listen to now and feel like they are could be released right now, in some ways. And so and when I've asked a few people, what's interesting also too, and I've talked a little bit about who to some people about doing this album, nominating this album, and I've asked, everyone has a different favorite track. So it's not it's just New Sensation or just Never Tear Us Apart. I asked my wife, and her favorite track is Mystify, which surprised me a little bit.
My mom's is Need You Tonight.
See, there you go.
Said that was very important to her in college. Were the words she used.
Yeah, and so I think that it's just one of those albums that I think it is perfect in that way, and that it checks so many boxes, and yet it hits people in different ways, and it has, I think, stood the test of time.
Well said. We've spoken about kind of universality versus the general, right? To kind of set up that dichotomy again, and I think the universality comes in these very specific phrases on this album. These kind of dun 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 dun, and that's now iconic, right? So you have this anchor that has kind of become just a really powerful hook. But then they also allow themselves to go off to some weird kind of more abstract places within even sometimes the same song, which I think probably helps with the making it something that's specific yet very accessible on a variety of different levels, like like you've mentioned here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some songs on this album that are so different than other songs. Like something like "Calling on Nations" or "Tiny Daggers," right? Which are late album tracks. Mm-hmm. They're still, I think, great songs, but they're just very different. Like they don't sound like the earlier parts of the album. And I think, it's interesting to me to think about like them being artists crafting an album. Right. Like, why, always just, one of the things, brain games you play with yourself is like, why is that, why do they choose to put that song on this album? Right.
Yeah. And, sequencing is also a very, we've talked about that a fair amount, a big task.
Yeah, and you just think about what are they trying to accomplish? What do they want to accomplish? And what are they trying to say musically? Because it does feel a little bit like it's maybe two albums at certain. There's the early tracks on the album if you think about sequencing, and then the later tracks are really different. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about the album, you flip the album over back in the old days. The second side, the B side's a little bit different, but yeah, it still all feels very like cohesive to INXS at that moment, right? And so totally. I just think I think it's perfect because it's perfect for INXS at that moment too, I feel like.
Yeah. Well said. There's some foreshadowing towards that second half definitely feels like the more eccentric half.
Yes.
But I'm even thinking about like what you mentioned, Calling All Nations, starting to lead towards a little bit of that epic I think of a song that like not a lot of people know on the next album, The Stairs, as being like this sort of, I don't know, like momentous song as opposed to just like this like real catchy pop hit that like, they're sort of telegraphing maybe in some ways where they're going a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, and then I think that they also like there's expectations put on them, right? And so like I think of like when they release, Welcome to Wherever You Are in '92, like I just remember distinctly that was the '92 Olympics in Barcelona, and not enough time. I think before the album even came out, Not Enough Time was like the NBC like theme song for the Olympics. Like if you're INXS, is that really what you want? Probably not, right? That doesn't seem like rock cool. But I think you do though in the second half of Kick see some, as you're saying, Michael, some foreshadowing of some of the more eccentric, but also some of the more pop type tracks that they would release in later albums.
We're getting into a selling out question here, right? Which is an ongoing conversation in like the role of commercial interests in bands of this stature. Because I'll say, the Smile had a song that played as on-tracked music for an NFL game. So like there's no band is immune to that effect of getting the NBC or the Fox money.
Yeah, but I just don't think like in 87, 88, would you think INXS would be like the soundtrack of the Olympics?
That's funny.
Just a few years later. I don't know, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
I'm just remembering now that like talking about the Olympics, I remember there being, this is totally off track, but whatever. In 88, there was an album. Do you remember this? There was an album of music that I don't know if it was commissioned for the Olympics, but like Whitney Houston's One Moment in Time was everywhere. I think it became a number one hit, but like there's a whole, like I remember owning the record album of the 1988 Olympic, whatever it was.
Totally. Yeah. There was one for 92 too, that Not Enough Time was on.
Yeah.
It was like Barcelona Gold or something.
Yeah.
Do we have one for this year?
No, probably not.
You don't think?
I mean, well, maybe
if they stop doing that,
maybe they're gonna market Celine's performance at the opening ceremony.
Listen, she was great. We're all really proud of Celine. I think she doesn't need us to be proud of her. Okay, there's no 2024 Olympic album, or seemingly none.
Well, after that documentary, the Olympics got a little bit of flack for the way they handle money.
Yes.
Anyway,
listen, the IOC. The IOC is a big ol' dangerous organization. All right, this has been a sound case you've made, my friend. This has been a very sound case. I think we've got enough data to deliberate, don't we?
I think so.
Okay, so we're moving into the deliberation phase. Boom, boom.
We'll get a sound effect eventually.
We're gonna have a sound effect. I'm pretty sure.
We'll get a sound. One of those like boards that they, where you like, boo, you press a button and. I don't know, like boing,
yeah. We're ready. Actually, we'll hire a professional Foley artist to just do all that.
Yeah,
to do all that. Yeah, like
they'll sit in on recordings
on Prairie Home Companion. You remember that from Prairie Home Companion? They had that Foley artist. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Okay, so listen, I think you did a pretty damn good job. I always love when a guest name checks a radio station from growing up, and especially when they say it in a fashion that I'm pretty sure the DJs probably said it when they were doing the station identification. They're like, I'm a sucker for that. Kind of shows that they're transported by this album, that the memory of this album takes them back to a time in their life. Being transportive is a big element here. What do you think?
I think that first of all, you name dropped Nine Inch Nails in connection to INXS, so like that,
which I think makes a lot of sense. Yep.
I mean, yeah, like early Nine Inch Nails, wisely stated. So like making a connection like that, actually, that definitely contributed to your case. Mm-hmm. But also just the fact that you mentioned like there's. And not meaning this in a bad way. I think sometimes like when bands have a lot of like recognizable riffs that become really poppy, it can become sort of like generic. But I think you mentioned that, and for me that's what this album feels like. It feels like there are iconic little segments of these songs. I mean, I bet I am almost positive that you could play the first half second of New Sensation and I'd be able to tell you what song it was. Yeah. Like not even a full second, and I'd be able to get it.
I think that's happened to me at trivia before.
Yeah, like I mean, and for me, I mean that was a strong aspect of your case.
Yeah, so. the personal element, it being so close to you at that very pivotal tween time of your life. I think that's in Oklahoma. Yes, bring the funk to Oklahoma. That's what I want. It's important. It's important that these kind of bands can reach kids in those spaces. It's a good thing about globalization, I would say. Yeah. Michael, why don't you put it to me?
Are we doing this again?
Yes.
Well, Tyler.
Yes.
You've heard his case.
I've heard his case.
He's sitting across from us, so it'll be real awkward if you tell him to go home and that this album sucks. So, what do you think? INXS, Kick. Does it go to 11? Can it join the Pantheon?
It does. You've done well.
Yay.
I'm also curious. Have you played this for your daughters?
Yes, we actually they heard it for the first time this week.
Okay.
In preparation, and they didn't immediately tell me to turn it off. So
that's good.
And I think that's part of like thinking a band. Like I don't think talking again about the sexuality of the album. Like I don't think that was conscious for me necessarily. It was something I was probably experiencing, exploring, understanding.
Sure, yeah.
Like when you play it as a parent and you're like 12-year-old sitting next to you in the car and you're like, oh, there's actually quite a bit of sex in this.
And you're like, they'll never know. They'll never, it's gonna soak into their consciousness the same way it did into yours.
Yeah, but what's interesting about it, and again, back to nostalgia, right, is that Ada is exactly the age I was when I was first listening to this album now. So there's something kind of nice, kind of full circle about that.
Full circle, yeah. I know that Elliot and Ada are Olivia Rodrigo fans, and I know that they're Chapel Roan fans, and that those you can definitely see that sort of the 80s influence, the 80s sound is influencing those women in particular now.
Totally.
In a huge way.
We took their kids to Guts World Tour, and when it was in Chicago, and there is something about Olivia Rodrigo that is very early 90s callback, right?
Yeah, she's got that.
Yeah,
she's great.
And it's a lot of, I read she apparently has a lot of former 80s and early 90s, parent followers who kids are listening to the music now, but there's something that kind of feels very 90s about it. That's very much also in the culture right now, though. 90s is having a comeback, right? So
it's always, what is it in Portland? It's always the 90s in Portland. Is that what?
Dream of the 90s is alive in Portland.
Dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. Yeah. Well, Jason, you did a hell of a job, and we can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been a real treat.
Got anything to plug? Any shout outs?
It's for the, I'll be back at it at the theater school, trying to get this fall, trying to get the next class, the next Tylers coming through. I'll be meeting with and recruiting throughout the fall. So that's what I'll be focusing on right now.
If you're in Chicago, go check out one of the student shows, because these are some of the finest. These are some of the finest academic theater shows you will see anywhere in the country. I can attest to that. Always exciting stuff happening in that building. I will always hold it near and dear to my heart, and I'm glad that I didn't let it burn down that one time. And we We might need to bring that up on the podcast.
That's a great story.
Bonus content.
And you can guarantee that I'll be, torturing or exposing student workers to music and in the office for years to come.
You heard it here first, everybody.
Well, dear listeners, remember to follow us,
subscribe, all that,
medias and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, if you like this conversation, why don't you go ahead and listen to the whole album?
Yes.
Kick by INXS. I think there's 2 versions of it on Spotify. There's like the remastered version, and which Damien explained that to us one time, and it sort of left my brain because I'm not an auditory learner.
Just go listen to the songs; they're great. We love you. We'll see you soon.